Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has spent months convincing Canadians that the consumer carbon tax has made life more expensive, even though most Canadians got more money back from rebates than they spent in taxes. But Mark Carney, in his first act as Canada's newly appointed Prime Minister, cancelled the consumer carbon tax himself. And when he did that, he deprived Poilievre of his most successful campaign issue. So now, Poilievre has to find a new issue. And he's setting his sights on a different target, Canada's industrial carbon pricing. But would cancelling industrial carbon pricing really benefit Canadians? Industrial carbon pricing isn't what we typically think of as a tax. It's more accurately called a large emitter trading system, or a LETS. And large emitter trading systems only affect a small number of Canada's largest polluters, around just 600 companies. That's a small number, but those 600 companies are responsible for almost 40% of our national emissions. Here's how large emitter trading systems work. Large polluters pay a fee for every ton of greenhouse gas they emit. As of April 1st, 2025, the headline price they pay is now $95 per ton. But large emitter trading systems reduce the amounts that companies actually pay so that Canadian businesses can remain competitive with those in other countries. In practice, with adjustments, the cost of carbon pricing barely impacts the bottom line. Analysts say that the average price paid is closer to $5 per ton of emissions, and that oil companies in particular have to pay less than the cost of a single timbit per barrel of oil produced. The money raised from industrial carbon pricing funds grants and incentives that go back to help companies lower their emissions. Because the money comes from the polluting companies themselves, it helps cut emissions without costing taxpayers. And when companies take steps to reduce their emissions, they can actually make money. That's because under the system, companies can earn lucrative carbon credits, which can be banked or sold to other emitters to offset their emission fees. Among the 140 or so measures that make up Canada's 2030 emissions reduction plan, it is large emitter trading systems that are expected to cut the most emissions. The Canadian Climate Institute estimates that by 2030, large emitter trading systems will deliver 20 to 48% of expected emissions reductions, more than any other policy. Remember, we already have to make up for cancelling the consumer carbon tax. The industrial carbon price is expected to reduce at least 3 times as many emissions as the consumer policy. Eliminating it would leave Canada without a credible climate plan, making the 2030 climate target impossible to reach. Now, ironically, Poilievre chose to announce his promise to cut industrial carbon pricing at an Ontario steel mill, which just happens to be a prime example of how well the policy works. That's because this facility received about $3.5 million of federal grant money raised from the carbon price program to help it replace its natural gas furnace with cleaner technology. That helped make the plant more efficient, and it cut its projected emissions by 17%. In his new plan, Poilievre says he'd replace the current program with even larger grants and incentives to motivate big polluters to voluntarily invest in new clean technology. The problem is that this shifts the costs of cutting pollution onto taxpayers. Instead of the polluters paying, Canadians would, like this guy, or this lady. Experts are also warning that eliminating industrial carbon pricing would undermine Canada's goals of developing trade with partners like the EU and the UK. These are places that have carbon pricing, and these partners find it unfair to trade with those that don't. So the EU and the UK are implementing tariffs against countries without carbon pricing to protect their industries. So when you get into the details, it's hard to see how cancelling the industrial carbon price would benefit Canadians. It only affects a small number of the largest polluters, it doesn't add much to costs, and it generates funding for the decarbonization initiatives that Canadians want. Mr. Poilievre is smart enough to know this, but he also knows that he succeeded in convincing a lot of voters that the consumer carbon tax was driving up the cost of living, even though most taxpayers got more back in rebates than they paid in fees. Now he seems to be betting that he can pull off the same trick a second time. Let's hope that Canadian voters don't get fooled again. If you like this video, please like and subscribe for more content like this. And if you want to learn more about this issue, you can read the full article on mydamac.com. The link is in the description.